My wife filed for divorce at Christmas dinner while her father laughed and told me I would be homeless by February. My in-laws applauded as if they were watching a Broadway show finale. I sat there quietly feeling the weight of the moment settle in my chest and reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a black metal card with no chip and only a gold signature on the back, a card my late Uncle Ray gave me when I was 18. I handed it to the waiter who had come to collect the bill. He looked at the name on the back, his eyes went wide, and he leaned down to whisper 5 words that silenced the entire table. "Welcome home, Mr. Chairman. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Andre, and up until an hour ago I was just a 32-year-old music teacher at a public high school in Chicago. To my students I was Mr. A, the guy who stayed late to help them master their scales. To the family sitting around this table at the Onyx Room, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, I was nothing more than a charity case. The Onyx Room was the kind of place where the water cost more than my hourly wage, with velvet walls, crystal chandeliers, and a silence that screamed money. I sat there in a suit I had bought off the rack 3 years ago during a clearance sale, trying to make myself small as my wife's family took up all the oxygen in the room. My father-in-law, Preston, sat at the head of the table like a king on a throne. He was a man who had made his money in used car dealerships and never let anyone forget it. To my left was Chad, my brother-in-law. Chad was white, worked on Wall Street, and had the kind of arrogance that came from never hearing the word no. He had just finished telling the table about a $1 million deal he closed before the holidays. He slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "You should have seen their faces when I walked in," Chad bragged, loosening his silk tie. "I told them the price just went up 10%, and they thanked me for it. That is how you handle business." He turned to his wife, my sister-in-law, and kissed her cheek. "That is why you are driving a brand new Porsche come Monday morning, babe." The table erupted in oohs and ahs. My mother-in-law clapped her hands together, her diamond bracelets clinking. Preston beamed at Chad like he was the son he actually wanted. Then slowly Preston turned his gaze toward me. The warmth left his eyes instantly. "So Andre," he said, his voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear, "how is the little flute teaching gig going? That holiday bonus going to be enough to buy Vanessa a new tire for Chad's Porsche, maybe a hubcap?" The table laughed. It was a cruel, practiced laugh. They had been making these jokes for 5 years. I felt the heat rise in my neck, but I kept my face neutral. I looked at my wife Vanessa, hoping for a lifeline, hoping she would squeeze my hand or tell her father to stop. Instead, she sighed, took a long sip of her wine, and shifted her chair slightly away from me. It was a small movement, just an inch, but it felt like a mile. Inside my head, I heard the voice of Uncle Ray. He was the only family I had really known a man who worked as a janitor but carried himself like royalty. "Patience is the most expensive currency in the world, Andre," he used to tell me. "Do not spend it all at once. Save it for when the bill really comes due." I took a deep breath and forced a smile. "The students are doing well, Preston. We have a recital next month if you all want to come." Chad snorted into his drink. "A recital? That is cute. Real cute. I will check my schedule, but I am pretty sure I am busy making actual money that day." The waiters arrived, then placing plates of Wagyu beef in front of us. The smell of rich truffle butter filled the air, but my stomach was in knots. I picked up my fork, just wanting this night to end so I could go home and grade papers in peace. That was when Vanessa put her hand on my wrist. Her grip was cold. "Andre, put the fork down," she said. The chatter at the table stopped. Everyone seemed to know what was coming except me. I looked at her, really looked at her. She was beautiful, the woman I had loved since college, but her eyes were hard now like polished stone. She reached under the table and pulled out a thick yellow envelope. She placed it right next to my untouched steak. "I cannot drag this into the new year," she said, her voice steady and devoid of emotion. I am filing Andre. We are done. I stared at the envelope. My ears started ringing. Vanessa, I whispered. What are you doing? It is Christmas. She shook her head, annoyed that I was making this difficult. This is not about Christmas. This is about reality. Look at this table, Andre. Look at Chad. Look at my father. They are men who build things. They are men who provide. And then look at you. You are 32 years old, and you are still talking about band recitals and saving coupons. I need a man, Andre. Not a dreamer on a $45,000 salary. My mother-in-law nodded sagely as if Vanessa had just made a wise investment choice. It is for the best, honey, she said. You have outgrown him. You need someone who fits our lifestyle. I felt like the floor was opening up beneath me. Vanessa, I said, my voice cracking. I supported you when you started your marketing firm. I paid the rent for 2 years so you could take 0 salary. I turned down the principal position because you said you needed me home more to help with your anxiety. Does that not count as providing? Vanessa laughed a dry, bitter sound. That was years ago, Andre. Do not act like a martyr. You turned down the promotion because you were scared of responsibility. That is who you are. Small, safe, and I am tired of being small with you. Preston reached over and picked up the yellow envelope, tapping it against the table like a gavel. Finally, he boomed. I have been telling her to drop the dead weight for years. He looked at me with a sneer that twisted his face. You hear that, boy? She is upgrading. You will be out of the house by tomorrow. I give you until February before you are sleeping in that beat-up Honda of yours. The humiliation was a physical blow. I could feel the eyes of strangers in the restaurant boring into my back. My wife was leaving me because I wasn't rich enough. Her family was celebrating my destruction. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst, but strangely my hands were steady. I looked at Vanessa one last time. Are you sure about this? I asked. Once I walk out those doors, there is no coming back. I will not be the backup plan you call when you realize the grass isn't greener. Vanessa rolled her eyes. Oh, spare me the dramatic speech. Just sign the papers and go. Preston snapped his fingers for the waiter. Check, he yelled. The waiter, a young man with a polite demeanor, hurried over with a leather folder. Preston took it, looked at the total, and then a wicked grin spread across his face. He looked at Chad, then at Vanessa, and finally at me. You know what Preston said? His voice dripping with malice. Since this is Andre's last night as part of the family, I think it is only fair he pays for dinner. A parting gift for the years we tolerated him. He tossed the leather folder onto my plate. It landed with a heavy thud right on top of the steak. My blood ran cold. I opened the folder. The total was $4,800. I stared at the number. 4,800. My bank account currently had exactly $312 in it. I knew that because I had checked it in the car, worried about having enough for gas. The reason it was so low was that just last week, Vanessa had cried about needing her designer wardrobe updated for a client pitch, and I had drained my savings to give her $5,000. She had taken my money, and now she was watching her father destroy me. Pay up. Andre. Chad jeered, leaning back in his chair. Unless you need to ask for a payment plan. Do they do layaway for dinner? My mother-in-law chuckled. Oh, stop it, Chad. He probably has to call his bank to increase his limit from $50. I looked at Vanessa. She was checking her phone, refusing to meet my eyes. She knew I didn't have the money. She knew exactly what she had spent. And she didn't care. They wanted to break me. They wanted to see me beg. They wanted me to admit I was the failure they always said I was. I closed the folder slowly. The room felt incredibly quiet. The waiter was standing there looking uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive perfume and roasted meat, and exhaled the last 10 years of my life. The trying, the pleasing, the shrinking myself to fit into their world. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. My fingers brushed against the cold metal of the card. Uncle Ray had given it to me on his deathbed 10 years ago. He had gripped my hand, his eyes burning with intensity, and said, "Andre, this is not just a card. It is a test. You cannot use this until you have lived 10 years as a regular man. You have to understand what it means to struggle to work to be ignored. Only then will you deserve what this card unlocks." Tonight at midnight, the 10 years were up. I pulled the card out. It was heavy black and completely blank on the front. No bank logo, no chip. Just smooth, matte black metal. On the back in gold was a signature and a 10-digit sequence. I placed the card on top of the bill. Preston squinted at it. "What is that? A library card?" He laughed, but the laugh was nervous this time. He had never seen a card like that. I didn't answer him. I looked at the waiter. "I believe this will cover it," I said softly. The waiter reached out and took the card. He frowned at first, turning it over in his hands. He looked confused. He looked like he was about to tell me they didn't accept gift cards. And then his eyes caught the gold signature on the back. He froze. His face went pale, draining of all color. His hands started to tremble. He looked from the card to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. He didn't walk to the terminal. He didn't ask for ID. He leaned down his face inches from mine and whispered the words that would change everything. "Welcome home, Mr. Chairman." The table went deadly silent. Preston's smile faltered. Chad froze with his drink halfway to his mouth. Vanessa looked up from her phone, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What did you just call him?" Preston demanded, his voice cracking slightly. The waiter ignored him. He stood up straight, snapped his heels together, and signaled to the maitre d' who was standing by the entrance. The maitre d', a stern Italian man named Stefano, who had terrified me for years, saw the signal. He saw the black card in the waiter's hand. And he started running. I sat back in my chair and looked at my wife. The divorce papers were still on the table. The silence stretched out heavy and suffocating, but for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't the one who couldn't breathe. The leather folder containing the $4,800 bill felt heavy in my hand, but not as heavy as the small wooden box I had held exactly 10 years ago today. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow, transporting me back to a rainy Tuesday in a small cemetery on the outskirts of Chicago. It was Uncle Ray's funeral. To the rest of the world, Raymond Vance was just a janitor who mopped floors at a downtown skyscraper for 40 years. To Vanessa and her family, he was a punchline. I remembered standing by his grave, the rain soaking through my cheap suit while Vanessa sat in her car with the engine running because she did not want the mud to ruin her designer heels. When I got back in the car that day, her mother had wrinkled her nose and sprayed perfume in my direction. "It is sad, really," she had said, looking at me with pity. "But I suppose failure is a genetic trait. It runs in your blood, Andre. Just make sure you do not pass it on to my grandchildren." They did not know what was in the box the estate lawyer had handed me that afternoon. They assumed Ray had died penniless, leaving me nothing but his old work boots. And they were right about the money, or so I thought at the time. There was no cash in the box. There was no check. There was only a letter written in shaky handwriting and this strange, heavy black card. I remembered sitting in my studio apartment reading his final words. The letter said, "Andre, you have a heart of gold, but gold is soft and easily bent. I have watched you let people walk over you because you are afraid of losing their love. I am leaving you everything, but not yet. If I give it to you now, they will take it from you, or worse, you will become just like them." The letter outlined a test, a condition that seemed insane at the time. I was to live as a regular man for exactly 10 years. I was not allowed to use the card. I was not allowed to tell a soul about it. I had to work, struggle, and build a life on my own merit. I had to prove that I could be a man of character without the crutch of wealth. The letter ended with a specific instruction. On the Christmas Eve of the 10th year, go to the Onyx Room. Present this card. If you have kept your word, the world will open to you. For a decade, I thought Uncle Ray was maybe a little senile, that the card was perhaps a small savings account with a few $1,000s he had scraped together. But I loved him, so I kept the promise. I kept the card hidden in the lining of my jacket, and I lived the life of a poor music teacher. I blinked, bringing myself back to the present. The restaurant sounds rushed back in, the clinking of silverware, the jazz music, the laughter of my father-in-law. I looked at Vanessa. She was scrolling through her phone, probably texting her friends about how she had finally dumped me. I looked at her, and for the first time in 10 years, the fog of love lifted. I realized that my poverty was not a lack of ability. It was a choice, a sacrifice. I looked at her manicured hands and remembered 3 years ago when she fell into a deep depression after losing her first job. I was offered the principal position at the high school that year. It came with a 40% raise and a private office. I turned it down. I stayed a teacher so I could have the hours to drive her to therapy, to cook her dinner, to hold her when she cried at 3 a.m. I told her I didn't get the job because I didn't want her to feel guilty. She called me unambitious. She said I lacked drive. Then my eyes shifted to Chad, the hotshot banker brother-in-law who was currently swirling his scotch and looking at me with disgust. He had forgotten last summer. He had forgotten the frantic phone call I received at midnight. He had gambled away $10,000 he didn't have at an underground poker game. He was terrified his wife Vanessa's sister would find out. He was crying, begging me for help. I didn't have $10,000 lying around. I took on 20 extra tutoring students. I worked weekends for 3 months. I paid his debt to save his marriage, and what did he do? He never thanked me. He buried the secret and went right back to mocking my cheap shoes at family gatherings. I felt a cold clarity wash over me. They called me a leech. They called me a dead weight. But as I looked around the table, I realized the truth. I was not the parasite. I was the host. I had been feeding their egos, covering their mistakes, and absorbing their cruelty for a decade. I checked my watch. The second hand swept past the 12. It was midnight. The 10 years were up. The promise was kept. Uncle Ray's test was over. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt powerful. I stood up from the table. The movement was smooth, deliberate. I didn't hunch my shoulders. I didn't look down. I stood to my full height, buttoning my jacket with one hand. Vanessa looked up, annoyed. "Sit down, Andre. You are making a scene." "No, Vanessa," I said, and my voice was different. It was deeper, steady, resonating with the authority she had never heard before. "I am not making a scene. I am making a decision." I pointed to the divorce papers on the table. "You are absolutely sure about this? I am asking you one last time. Once I walk out that door, there is no coming back. I will not be your safety net anymore." Vanessa laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that grated on my ears. She looked at her father and rolled her eyes. "Look at him, Dad. He is trying to sound tough. Andre, stop acting. It is embarrassing. Just sign the papers, figure out how to pay the bill, and get out of my life. I do not want a man who asks if I am sure. I want a man who can afford to buy me dinner." Chad chimed in, leaning forward with a smirk. "Yeah, Andre. Put your money where your mouth is." "Oh, wait, you can't. Is that why you are standing up, going to make a run for the back door?" "Do not worry. I will tell the cops which way you went." I looked at Chad, then at Preston, who was watching me with pure contempt. I looked at Vanessa one last time, memorizing the look of disdain on her face. I wanted to remember it. I wanted to remember exactly how little I meant to them. I picked up the black metal card from the table where I had placed it. It felt warm now, humming with potential. I opened the leather folder containing the bill that was meant to bankrupt me. I slid the card inside right on top of the receipt. The waiter was standing there looking nervous. He had seen Preston yelling. He expected a declined card. He expected a scene. I handed him the folder. "I believe this belongs to the house," I said. Chad snorted loud enough for the next table to hear. "What is that A library card? Does it get us a discount on late fees, or is it a punch card for free coffee? God, you are pathetic." I ignored him. I kept my eyes on the waiter. He took the folder. He opened it. I watched his face as the realization hit him, as he saw the signature that matched the name on the building's deed. I watched his knees buckle slightly. I watched the color drain from his face as he realized who he was standing in front of. I waited for the silence. The waiter did not move toward the credit card terminal. He did not walk away to process the payment. He stood there frozen, staring down at the black metal card in his hand as if he were holding a live grenade. It was heavier than any credit card had a right to be forged from solid matte black titanium with a weight that commanded respect. There were no raised numbers on the front, no holographic dove, and certainly no bank logo. There was only a single intricate symbol etched into the center in real 24-karat gold. It was a stylized music note interwoven with a medieval shield, the crest of a family that very few people knew existed, but every powerful person in Chicago feared. I saw the waiter's hand tremble. A fine bead of sweat appeared on his forehead despite the air-conditioned chill of the restaurant. He looked from the card to me, his eyes wide, searching my face for something he had missed before. He wasn't looking at my cheap suit or my scuffed shoes anymore. He was looking at my eyes, seeing the resemblance to the man who had designed that crest. He didn't dare swipe the card. To swipe it would be an insult. Instead, he snapped the leather folder shut with both hands, held it against his chest like a sacred text, and raised his hand high in the air, snapping his fingers twice in a sharp, urgent rhythm. This was not a signal for a busboy. This was a code red. At the table, the silence was beginning to crack. "Preston," my father-in-law slammed his palm against the white tablecloth, making the wine glasses jump. "What is taking so long?" he barked, his face turning a shade of purple that matched the Pinot Noir in his glass. "Why are you just standing there, son?" "Is the card declined?" "Of course it is declined." He turned to the rest of the table, gesturing wildly. "I told you. I told all of you. He is trying to stall. He probably found that piece of scrap metal in a junk drawer. Call the police. I want this fraud arrested for theft of services before he tries to sneak out the bathroom window." Chad laughed, shaking his head. "It is sad, really. Trying to pay with a prop. Did you get that from the drama department at your school? Andre?" I did not answer them. I did not look at them. I kept my eyes fixed on the double doors at the back of the restaurant, the ones marked private. Suddenly, those doors burst open. Stefano, the maitre d' of the Onyx Room, came running out. Stefano was a legend in this city. He was a large, imposing Italian man who was famous for two things: his impeccable suits and his absolute arrogance. I had seen him make senators wait 40 minutes for a table. I had seen him kick out a famous rapper for wearing the wrong shoes. He was a man who bowed to no one. But tonight he was running. He was running so fast he nearly slipped on the marble floor. His face was pale, his eyes wide with panic. He sprinted across the dining room, ignoring the confused looks of the other diners. When he reached our table, Chad stood up, blocking his path, assuming Stefano was coming to throw me out. Finally, Chad said, puffing out his chest, "Get security. This guy is bothering us." Stefano did not even look at Chad. He extended one massive arm and shoved my brother-in-law aside with enough force to send Chad stumbling back into his chair. "Move." Stefano growled his voice, leaving no room for argument. Then the man who never bowed to anyone stopped directly in front of me. He looked at the card in the waiter's hand, then he looked at me. He took a deep shuddering breath, smoothed his jacket, and slowly, deliberately bent his waist. He bowed. It was not a polite nod. It was a deep 90-degree bow of total subservience. He held the position for 3 long seconds while the entire restaurant fell deathly silent. When he straightened up, there were tears in his eyes. He leaned in close, his voice trembling with emotion, but loud enough for every person at my table to hear clearly. "Welcome home, Mr. Chairman." The words hung in the air like smoke. Preston's mouth fell open. Vanessa froze her hand halfway to her wine glass. Stefano turned to the waiter and snapped his fingers. "Bring the vintage, the 1942. Now." Then he turned back to me, his hands clasped in front of him. "We have been waiting for this day, sir. The board was notified at midnight. The transition is complete." I looked at Preston, whose arrogance was beginning to fracture into confusion. "You think my Uncle Ray was a janitor?" I said, my voice calm. "You laughed at him. You mocked him. But Ray was not just a janitor. Ray was Raymond Vance. In the music industry, they called him the King. He produced the biggest soul and jazz albums of the 70s and 80s. But he didn't trust banks, and he didn't trust fame. He took every penny he made and bought property. He bought land. He built a hospitality empire from the shadows because he wanted his life to be private. Obsidian Hospitality Group. That is his legacy." I gestured to the room around us. "He owns the Onyx Room. He owns the Ritz downtown. He owns 20 other 5-star hotels across the country. And he hated people who judged others by their appearance. That is why he swept floors in his own buildings, to see who would treat him with dignity and who would treat him like trash." Stefano nodded solemnly. Mr. Vance was a genius, and he left strict instructions. The entire Obsidian portfolio, the properties, the investments, the rights to his music catalog. Everything was held in a blind trust for 10 years. Stefano paused, looking around the table at my stunned in-laws before delivering the final blow. "As of 12 o'clock tonight, the trust has dissolved. The sole beneficiary and new chairman of the board is his nephew, Andre." The reality of what was happening crashed into the table like a tidal wave. I watched the color drain out of Preston's face until he looked like a ghost. His hand, which had been holding his wine glass, went limp. The crystal goblet slipped from his fingers and shattered against the edge of the table. Red wine exploded outward, soaking the front of his pristine white dress shirt, looking like a gunshot wound in the center of his chest. He didn't even notice. He just stared at me, his lips moving but making no sound. Chad was the first to speak, but his voice was a high-pitched squeak stripped of all its earlier bravado. "Wait!" Chad stammered, his eyes darting around the room. "Obsidian Group. You mean the company that owns the skyscraper on 5th Avenue? The one my investment firm leases our offices from." I turned my gaze to Chad. The realization on his face was delicious. "Yes, Chad. The building where you work. The building where you just bragged about your corner office. My building." Chad slumped back in his chair, looking like he was about to vomit. He knew better than anyone that Obsidian Group was ruthless with its tenants. He knew that his firm's lease was up for renewal next month. He knew that his career, his status, his Porsche, all of it depended on a landlord he had spent the last 5 years mocking. And then there was Vanessa, my wife. The woman who 5 minutes ago had thrown a divorce settlement at me because I couldn't afford her lifestyle. She was staring at the yellow envelope on the table, the papers that declared I was worthless, the papers that she had signed with such confidence. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She looked up at me and I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. It wasn't love. It was terror. She was realizing that she had just thrown away a lottery ticket right after the numbers were called. The maitre d' Stefano stepped closer to me, ignoring the devastation at the table. Your car is waiting out front, Mr. Chairman. We took the liberty of bringing the Phantom around from the garage. And regarding this table, I held up a hand, stopping him. I looked at the spilled wine on Preston's shirt. I looked at Chad, who was hyperventilating. I looked at Vanessa, who was reaching out a trembling hand toward my arm. The building belongs to me now, Stefano, I asked. Everything, Sir Stefano replied. The land, the walls, the forks on the table. It is all yours. Good, I said. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. Then this is the first official order of business. I looked at my in-laws, savoring the silence, savoring the way they shrank under my gaze. The power balance had not just shifted. It had been destroyed and rebuilt in my image. And I was just getting started. Vanessa moved faster than I had ever seen her move in 10 years. Her manicured hand shot across the table, snatching the yellow envelope before the waiter could take it away. She ripped the seal open, pulled out the divorce papers she had slapped down only minutes ago, and began tearing them into pieces. The sound of ripping paper was loud and frantic in the quiet room. She shredded them until they were nothing but confetti raining down onto her plate of cold Wagyu beef. Andre, baby, please, she stammered, her voice trembling. You know I did not mean it. I was just stressed. The holidays, the pressure from my dad, it was all too much. I was just trying to push you. I wanted to motivate you because I know how much potential you have. I love you, Andre. We can fix this. We can start over. She reached for my hand, her eyes pleading, looking for the man who had always forgiven her, the man who had always been her safety net. But that man was gone. I pulled my hand away before she could touch me. I looked at her, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a cold, empty distance. You already signed it, Vanessa. I said, my voice low and steady. The court has not processed it yet, but in my heart, the ink is already dry. You made your choice when you thought I was worthless. You do not get to change your mind just because you found out I am the chairman. I turned away from her sobbing face and looked at Stefano, who was waiting for my command. Stefano, I said, pull the records for the Vance family VIP memberships. Stefano nodded immediately. We have them on file, sir. Preston, Vanessa, and Chad, all active platinum members. Cancel them, I said. Effective immediately. From this moment forward, the entire Obsidian hospitality system refuses to serve them. They are banned from the Onyx Room, the Ritz, and every property in my portfolio. If they set foot on the premises, have them escorted out by security. Stefano bowed. It is done, sir. Chad was the next to speak. He stood up, adjusting his silk tie, trying to salvage some shred of his dignity. He forced a laugh, though it sounded more like a choke. You can't be serious, Andre. So you have a title. Big deal. You are still just a music teacher playing dress-up. I am a partner at a major investment bank. I bring in millions. You think banning me from a restaurant hurts me? I can buy this place. I pulled my phone from my pocket. As the new chairman, my access to the Obsidian database was limitless, and that included detailed financial reports on all our commercial tenants and partners. I tapped the screen a few times, pulling up a flagged file that Uncle Ray's auditors had been compiling on Chad for months. Sit down, Chad, I said, not even looking up from the screen. I am not sitting down, he spat. I am leaving, and I am taking my wife with me. I turned the phone around so he could see the screen. It was a credit report, but not the one the public sees. This was a forensic accounting of his personal debts. You said you just closed $1 million deal, Chad. But according to this, you are currently $200,000 in debt to the Emerald Casino. And that new Porsche you bought. You didn't pay for it with a bonus. You pulled funds from your company's escrow account yesterday morning. That is embezzlement, Chad. That is a federal crime. Chad's face turned gray. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. My sister-in-law. Chad's wife let out a horrified scream. Chad, tell me that is not true. Tell me you did not steal money. I leaned forward, dropping my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. The funny thing is, Chad, your boss, Mr. Henderson is actually having dinner at table 4 right now. I can see him from here. He is enjoying the sea bass. Should I go over there and show him this report? Or should I let him enjoy his meal in ignorance for one more night? Chad's legs gave out. He collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He was shaking violently. He knew his life was over. One word from me and he would not just be fired, he would be in prison. Finally, Preston found his voice. The patriarch. The man who had terrorized me for a decade. He stood up, his face red wine still staining his shirt. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You listen to me, boy, he shouted, though his voice lacked its usual thunder. You do not get to do this to family. We took you in. We fed you. We gave you a place at our table when you were nothing. You owe us. You cannot just destroy us like this. I stood up slowly, towering over him. The restaurant was watching, but I didn't care. You never took me in, Preston. I said, my voice cold as ice. You tolerated me because you needed someone to look down on. You didn't feed me. I paid for every scrap of affection I ever got from this family with my dignity. And as for owing you, I took a step closer to him. Let's talk about your car dealership, Preston. The pride and joy of your life. The land it sits on, the prime real estate on corner of 5th and Main. Preston blinked confused. What about it? I have a lease. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You have a lease with a holding company called V Corp. You never bothered to check who owns V Corp, did you? It stands for Vance Corporation. Uncle Ray bought that land 20 years ago. Preston grabbed the back of his chair to steady himself. No, that is impossible. It is very possible, I continued. And I just checked the terms. Your 20-year lease expires next Tuesday. There is a clause that allows the landlord to deny renewal for any reason. I leaned in close, looking him dead in the eye. I am the landlord, Preston, and I have decided to go in a different direction with the property. I am thinking of turning it into a community center for underprivileged kids. Kids who actually appreciate what they are given. Preston clutched his chest, gasping for air. His eyes bulged. You have 7 days to vacate the premises, I said. 7 days to move 500 cars. I suggest you start packing tonight. Preston slumped back into his chair, defeated. The arrogance was gone. The power was gone. All that was left was a sad, broken old man who had realized too late that he had been kicking a sleeping lion for 10 years. I looked at them one last time. The crying wife, the criminal brother-in-law, the bankrupt father. They were not monsters anymore. They were just ruins. And I had walked out of the rubble without a scratch. I turned to Stefano. I am ready to go now. Right this way, Mr. Chairman. I walked toward the exit, leaving the silence of the table behind me. I didn't look back. There was nothing there for me anymore. My real life was just beginning. I stood up from the table for the final time. I smoothed down the front of my jacket. The same suit I had worn into this restaurant, feeling small and ashamed, now felt different. It didn't feel cheap anymore. It felt like armor. It felt like the uniform of a man who didn't need to shout to be heard. I looked down at Vanessa one last time. She was staring up at me, mascara running down her cheeks, her hands clutching the shredded remains of the divorce papers. She looked like she wanted to say something, maybe to beg, maybe to apologize, but the words were stuck in her throat. Vanessa, I said softly. You spent years telling me you wanted a rich man. You told me you needed someone with power, someone who commanded respect. Congratulations. You finally found him, and you managed to lose him in the exact same evening. I turned my back on them. I walked toward the heavy oak doors of the Onyx room. As I passed, every waiter, busboy, and host stopped what they were doing and bowed their heads. They weren't bowing to the suit. They were bowing to the name Vance. I walked out into the cool Chicago night air, leaving my in-laws sitting in the ruin of their own arrogance, staring at a $4,800 bill that they now had to figure out how to pay on their own. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom was waiting at the curb, its engine purring softly. A driver in a crisp uniform held the door open for me. I slid into the leather back seat, feeling the quiet luxury wrap around me. As we pulled away, I watched the restaurant disappear in the rear-view mirror. They laughed at me when I had nothing. Now I have the world at my fingertips, but I don't feel the need to laugh back. I just leave them behind. I learned tonight that the best revenge isn't trying to destroy the people who hurt you. It is simply living a life so full, so elevated, and so authentic that they can never touch you again. If you have ever been underestimated or pushed aside by the people who were supposed to support you, hit that like button and share this story. Let the world know that sometimes silence is the loudest roar of all.